the short answer to that is I've always been a writer, and I think if you talk to any artist or any writer, they'll tell you they started when they were young. That's the way they see the world. It's the way that I see the world. But I also was inspired with that question to think about like the book that I'm working on now that's coming out soon, Best Believe, because the idea that there's one linear journey isn't the way, that any field of learning or study works. And I think for me, every book is a new journey to how to become an author, how to become a better author, how to write a different format. Like you were talking about, picture books and why are very different. And even Best Believe, which is a biography, was a big journey for me because I had no experience with that form. And I was terrified with that form because I had this massive responsibility to tell someone's story correctly and to honor their story. And so I actually sought help. I had an opportunity to be mentored by the picture book biography queen, Monica Brown. And she took me under her wing and we spent time together learning how to find the doorway into this type of story. So in this journey, I think I now have this kind of superpower to be able to pursue this, but I never thought, even if you asked me a few years ago, that I'd be writing biographies. That's just such a precious thing to take somebody's narrative and to put that out into the world for people to interpret.
That is so beautiful. And I love the idea that each book that you write takes you on a new journey and kind of expands your definition of what you thought you could do. And to back up to talk about just the fact, as you mentioned, with picture books and the YA books, I mean, that's a big range. That's a big difference for that book. So how is your approach different for each audience?
This question always throws me because I feel like as far as boundaries are concerned, I mean, I always think about what's developmentally appropriate for somebody, but I don't think that really is the top of my list when I'm writing. I think what does the story has to be strong enough to almost want to tell itself. Firstly, I have to be super passionate about that, and I think that's the same for both. I can dig deeper into certain issues because of space, because of time, because of the age with kids with IA. But I don't think that if you look at the books that there are certain topics that you can't cover. I really don't. I think it's the way that you cover it. And so, for example, with Beauty Woke, I'm dealing with super heavy topics, topics of racism, topics of racism in social media and the news. I mean, those are not light topics by any means, but I do think that the way that you handle those, the way you think, what are you ready for when I tell this story? And when I tell the story, what are you going to be left with? Every picture book should always be a hug. It should always be like the book opens and those are like arms that come towards a young child. So I want to know whatever I'm covering, you feel like I'm holding your hand or I'm carrying you while I'm telling the story, telling the story. So I'm definitely cognizant of the littles and what they need. The bigger kids can definitely handle more, but really in the end, they need hope as well. So I think I'm definitely one of those writers that goes there with both audiences, just because I think that all of these kids from all of these age ranges are getting exposed, unfortunately in some ways, to some very, very powerful emotions, to things that they're not ready for, but they're being confronted with. And so I want to make sure that in each of their levels of readiness, they have some tools. When I wrote Beauty Woke, it was really a big part of it, giving them tools and saying, if you're dealing with this, if you're confronting this, if anything like this is in your space, let me reassure you that any of these words that are, whether you know the word racism or not, any of these harmful or hurtful words do not apply to you and they're false. That was a big message that I wanted to come across in that book. Anyone disparaging who you are, your culture, your heritage, it's 100% not true, period. so I think that we, in this particular climate, especially where kids are just exposed even to good things, we've got, cameras on everything, that we are the adults out there saying, I've got you. I want to make sure that I'm giving you a filter. The filter is, we need to know what's true and what's not. And as I just said, that never is, even if you hear it from grown-ups or people that you thought, were supposed to be role models. That's the kind of tool, that's the kind of protection and shield that I want all the babies when they read that to go through. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating because, like you said, that kids are exposed to these heavy topics at a really young age. And yet I know for you, having that joy and that hope is really important. So is that hard to be able to find a way to talk about these really heavy topics and yet have it be filled with joy and hope? Because I know you said that books are a way to fight against marginalization and oppression with the power of pure joy and unbridled hope. Why is that so important, and how do you find a way to do that?
Well, I think that anybody working in a classroom, anyone working with children, even statistically, when you look at the numbers, all of our kids are really suffering from mental health issues, even if they're coming from a home where they have comfort and safety, even then. And so why is that happening? Well, again, it's exposure partially. Partially, it's the positive of having knowledge of what's going on in the world. That's not a bad thing if they have support, but that's still heavy. Climate change is a massive one. All our kids understand and know that that's going on. Book banning, they're aware, they know what's going on. And so, when you have a young child, it's like, how has a young child, do I address these massive global issues, right? We are teaching them with our books that they can have a voice. We are teaching they can march. We're teaching them they can vote. We're teaching them that they can speak up and not just be a bystander. That is true, absolutely. But those are also heavy things to ask of a young person, to say, well, in order to solve the problems that are imminent and that are dangerous, you right now have to go out, and do these things. And someone may say, absolutely, that makes me feel wonderful and empowered. But let's also add in that all of them have homework and chores and activities and just regular drama and things in life that you have as you're growing up as a young person, in addition to these kinds of issues. So, it's so imperative that we, especially for the older ones, we keep it real, and that we say, yeah, these things are happening. You do have these issues with climate change. You do have these issues with censorship and book banning and trying to make the histories of BIPOC people, invisible, and then make excuses and reasons and weaponize language to justify. Yeah, those are all real. But there is that hope, because we all together, when we're telling stories, even just telling your story as a young person, even just writing your poem, whether it gets published or not, even just talking and discussing your feelings, even just doing individual things in your house, in your family, go out, those kinds of things that may not be considered, for example, the big march kind of things, in your community, in your neighborhood, at your church, just speaking and talking about those things. We need to give them the hope to know, yes, you can do the little things and the big things. And when you're ready for the big things, we're here for you. But you can start with the small things. You can start with the garden in your house. You can start with how you eat. You can start with the kinds of things you buy or don't buy, right? Those are doable things. And I think sometimes that's the key to helping with mental health, is to, even for adults, right? To say there are doable things where we can affect change, even if we can't get, for the adults, the politicians to do exactly what we think they need to be doing, for the kids, the parents or the adults to do what we really feel they should be doing. So yeah, hope in books comes through, not just the endings, but in the understandings that the character goes through. And again, as you were saying earlier, picture books are different from YA. I tend to, be on the side of manifestos and anthems in my type of writing, to give kids those recitations to say when they're feeling what they're feeling.
Yeah, like affirmations that they can have to replace those other harmful words, like you were mentioning, that they might be exposed to, and other messages. It's like you're giving them these positive ones to kind of, as like you said, as tools to use against that. And something else that I think is so important about your books is that um, you said you want to make people who are usually invisible in children's literature feel seen, like Black and Latinx girls and women, queer kids, single moms. What do you hope readers take away from your books?
You know, there's so many different things, and I want to start with a couple that I just heard, and these are the kinds of things, of course, when you hear them that you're like, oh, this is, you know, when you go through all of these, you know, publishing is not the, you know, easiest field to be in, and you know, sometimes you get I get super frustrated with the field, but then I think, oh, but this reader got this out of the book, and that's why we do it. And I've had other writers remind me, you're frustrated, but remember why we're doing this. And so one of those answers is home. You know, I had readers read Beauty Woke and say this feels like home. And sometimes what we want to do is to make a book feel like home, not just because somebody recognizes it, and there's so much power in that, right? When you're reading a book and like, oh, I can taste that, I can smell it, that's my kitchen. You know, or that's the way that my grandma abuelita, you know, speaks, or those are the kind of arguments that are in our house, or whatever it is, you know, you're like, you know, you feel how powerful is that, you know. But just also home, almost thinking of the sense of the person who feels homeless, you know, the kid who's, they're in a home, but they don't feel seen and they don't feel recognized, or they're not ready to be seen. That could even be the case. There's so many variations. And I want them to walk into the book and say, yes, that's it. And you know, the truth is the book that, you know, I hasn't been mentioned yet. The amount of kids who have come to me and said, that book is the most surprising book to hear that from to me, you know, is the one where I felt like, yep, I'm gonna keep going. Things are hard, but I'm gonna keep going. And so the other message is keep going, because wow, when you have young people who are already in the best of circumstances feeling everything exponentially, right? Like every feeling is like a giant rock concert type of feeling, and it's hyper joy and tremendous grief and all of these things, and it's happening every other second of the day, right? And you're adding all these other things. You need to give them, you know, a respite. And so, yeah, my YA books definitely deal with some hardcore things, but also there's respite in knowing that somebody else is going through those and ending up on the other side, and they are maybe like Macy and Disturbance Dictionary. Wow, you know, like that's not ending up the way we wish things would be. But she ends up on the other side, and she's still going, and she still has her story going. And it's the other part of it is you want kids to think, no, my story is still going. I'm still getting to write some of this. And I don't know what that is yet, maybe. Depending on the book that you're reading of mine, the truth is a little bit clearer on, hey, she's got a support system and a network, you know. And in the Disturbed Girl, it's like, wow, you know, I'm not sure what's going to happen. And I always tell readers, I'm like, I always imagine she goes to meet her teacher, Miss Black, where she moved, and shows up on her doorstep. So those are all the kinds of things that we want. And every reader who comes to like the whole collection of these books, I hope that, you know, when you think about why you do what you do, like the library, I want them to find all these different things. And I also want them to laugh. I feel like we separate this idea that there's grief on one side and laughter on the other, you know, which is why I so often have humor even when I have hard-hitting stuff going on.
I love that. And I want to talk a little bit about your writing itself. I mean, we've kind of talked about like the big issues, but your writing itself, you talk about, you write in rhythmic verse, which you've called the jazz of poetry, and you purposely include like a lot of slang, Spanglish, other non-standard English in your text. Can you talk a little bit more about how you choose the words that you actually put into the text?
I've answered this a few times, but this is the first time I've thought of this, so I'm going to share this. First of all, the jazz of poetry like says so much, but I want to kind of go back to just a little bit of my upbringing. So, you know, so much was lost by so many of us growing up when we weren't taught our native language, in my case, Spanish. You know, learning it secondhand, learning it through academic means is never the same way as learning it in the home. Absolutely never. So first of all, I want every kid who's reading to feel like that's just so beautiful, whatever that native language is. When we read Beauty Woke, we recite, you know, Spanish is magic. But I also add in, whenever I'm reading with kids, Korean is magic. Whatever, we ask the kids the languages in the room, those are magic. And, you know, so there's that. And there's also the part of those of us who didn't learn the language that are reading these books, many of the caregivers who are holding these babies in their laps, right? But they hold on to and honor and keep close to them all the words they did learn, because all of us have something, right? I want them to say, no, you hold on to that. If you know 5 words of your native tongue, hold on to them dearly, you know, precious. And then the other part of that is just addressing classism, you know, even internalized. When I, you know, was growing up, my father, William Ramos, you know, he used to call himself William Ramos, you know, and was definitely consciously or not consciously trying to survive. And so because of that, you know, trying to, you know, sort of what really is anglicizing language, thinking that only standard English is good English, thinking that the canon of literature, still to this day, I have to argue with them, is all white, dead white men. You know, you're intelligent and you're successful if, and I totally understand why. I get it. I get how important it was for him to get me to go to college. However, you know, non-standard English, what we're calling slang or Abe or Spanglish or all those things, that's the reason why language is so powerful and so beautiful to begin with. Language is gorgeous and beautiful and powerful because it can be sentence diagrammed. It's because it's flexible and it's fluid and it's reflective of the people. I mean, the kids, there used to be slang for eras and decades. These kids these days, it's every other week, you know? And it's brilliant. And when you listen to and you pay attention to the words, and you're like, wow, think about all the things that one word is communicating for the people who are using that word at that time, historically, culturally, the feeling of it. These are words to try on and wear. Each of these words is a dance with steps, you know? So I hear the music, and that's most likely because even though you have maybe a lot of us having parents saying, well, we need to do this to be successful. We also, many of us, I grew up in the Bronx, grew up with hip hop. The language, that's in your soul. And I'm always forever grateful that was something that was always on in the house, salsa or hip hop, or, you know, all those stations that I used, Kiss FM, you know, all the stations that I used to grow up with were, I think, very much training me and training everybody else in the poetry that we weren't getting in the classroom. So,
right, poetry and history and a lot, so much else wrapped up in that. And speaking of the words we use and the stories we tell, I know you said, one of my favorite quotes I read from you from an interview was, you said, whenever I'm in despair about the condition of the world, I turn to story to rewrite the narrative. Why is storytelling so powerful, especially to deal with like you said, there are a lot of heavy things out in the world today for kids and for us as adults. What makes storytelling such a powerful way to deal with that?
Because telling your own story is power and truth. And, you know, when we talk about book banning, those are people's attempts to control narrative and have power. 100%, nothing more. That's it. You know, they're terrified of story. The thing that always, you know, blows my mind is, let's not be terrified of forgiveness. Let's not be terrified of really acknowledging and moving forward and evolving. But the people who are banning books, that's exactly what they're terrified of. What does it look like to move forward, really? Right? What does equity really look like? What will I lose? We never, you know, and not thinking of what do we gain? What do we, it's so much. And so in a classroom, let's say you subtract let's say it's successful, and it won't be because we won't let it, but let's say all these books are subtracted. The minute that you teach kids the word truth in the word love and forgiveness, the minute they're going to find those stories, because that's what those stories are. They're just truth, and they're light. And kids, before we, put any kind of lens on them or frame on them outside of the home, even let's not even talk about the home, just outside of it, they are automatically gravitate towards the light. They automatically gravitate towards truth, and they automatically gravitate towards kindness. Every time you have a kid not doing that, something's wrong, and they've been hurt, or someone's teaching them that. Period. Kids gravitate towards kindness and love on their own. And when you give them the power to tell their stories, and when you give kids the power to tell them how it is in their houses and their lives and with their perspectives, right? You automatically move towards that better world. The minute that we take that away is when we move to the place where we're hurting each other. And that's the thing, where we're not acknowledging each other, where we're not letting some things go that we think we need, but are the exact opposite of what's going to help us move forward, progress, be happy. I think all of us have to kind of think, what does that mean? So going back to storytelling, it's one of the biggest keys. It's why books get attacked. So as far as like moving politics away, every kid, whatever that story is, we just need to hear it and listen and give them ways to tell it, and then that goes especially true of our older children who have more power to get into many different spaces to do that. Imagine every marginalized kid being asked, what's your story? How are you feeling? I'm not going to tell you my opinion right now. In other words, Macy of the world too, it's not always easy to listen to, is not always someone who's going to say things the way we want them to say it, and may not always tell us things that we want to hear, and may challenge us in ways that really are, rankle us. The amount of teachers have come to me and said, oh, this is like this kid in my classroom, and now I feel like I get it a little better. I've been told many, many, many times, and that comes from truth, because it's the same thing I experienced as a teacher, like, wow, this kid's coming into the room and nothing's going to go as planned. And so to kind of finish up answering, this is a big question. Storytelling comes from our ancestral roots. That's where we ended up looking at our world and understanding it better. That's something that's literally is in our DNA.
Right. I love that. I love that perspective. And just about, I'm keeping an eye on the time because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but maybe we could just end by, do you want to give us a preview of what you have coming up? You mentioned Best Believe. What are you working on now, or what do we have to look forward to?
So right now, this hasn't been announced yet, but I'm actually revising my next novel, so that's exciting. So look for announcements of that. It'll be coming out in 2024. But the biggest project right now is Best Believe. It's my picture book on the Tres Hermanas, three sisters from the Bronx, who I stumbled upon by accident, even though I grew up in the Bronx. And I couldn't believe the accomplishments of this family, in particular, these three sisters, these three women, and sought to do more research on that. And when I looked into them, I found out that one of the three sisters was alive, living in the Bronx. And so I thought, okay, this is one of those stories where you're thinking, why isn't someone told it on the scale where everybody has access to it, right? Everybody. It's certainly known in the Bronx. And I thought, oh, this is the thing where I have to write the story because it's not going to get written and I don't know how to do this. But I began researching and I reached out. I wasn't successful getting in touch with Elba at first, but I got in touch with one of the sisters, Evelina Antonetti's grandson, Joe Conso, who is called the photographer who took hip hop's baby pictures. I mean, he's an immense personality in himself. And he answered, and he connected me with Elba. And I, was, again, terrified at, wow, I have this story I'm going to tell, and this is her story. And the funny thing is after I sent it to her and to Joe, she called me because she was mad at me for the way I was telling the story. Isn't that, yeah. She said, because I had called it royalty, and I thought, I'm going to confront what the idea of royalty is. I'm going to call these women queens because they are called Bronx royalty. And And she said, listen, let me dispel a few notions for you. Evelina would not like that. And let me tell you why. And we had a meeting where the story changed, and I am so glad I was educated and I understood where she was coming from, or Evelina would have been coming from. And that was born the story that is coming out on February 6th, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, I am really looking forward to it. And for those who haven't seen it, you can go to NoNieqa's Instagram page to see the cover reveal with the amazing artwork. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us